Salut et bonjour, mes amis. Carrying on with the abundance of knowledge fruits the world has to offer, the forests of information we need to explore, and the sea of ideas we need to deep dive into. Today, we present to you yet another exciting discovery, idea, concept, or whichever way you want to describe the result of this human endeavor. Joined by my fellow explorer and knowledge enthusiast Chintan Bhatt, we discuss our findings and understanding of the theory of evolution. That's Bhatt spelled with a B-U-T-T and not a B-H-A-T. Is that right, Chintan?
Yeah, thanks for that awesome intro.
Right.
I didn't expect that at all. I had no idea you
I know,
had
I
done
know.
that.
That was the point. I wanted your giggles for the video. I don't know. But, so guys, if you haven't figured out, we're going to be talking about evolution today. Instead of doing a formal definition for it, we thought we'd go a little extempo. And instead of opening a Wikipedia page like we usually do, maybe you can still open it. That's Charles Darwin, for those of you who haven't noticed. That's the guy who came up with the theory. He called it On the Origin of Species. That was the name of the paper. Uh, Most of our information today comes from Richard Dawkins' book, The Greatest Show on Earth. That's actually probably something we should again have an advertisement for. We should have a link or something for that. But what is evolution? So evolution is it's a process which happens over a period of time where minute changes happens to a living organism depending on the environment they're in, and these minute changes eventually become they accumulate and they become large enough that you have different traits and properties and characteristics of the living being. It's probably an elaborate explanation. Would you say that's correct, Ochin?
Yeah,
It's a good
that's
definition.
pretty correct. As in, like, if you just ask a definition out of the boat, I guess you can just say
Yeah,
that. I
yeah.
guess
So,
it's not a
so
Wikipedia definition, but definitely makes
not a
sense.
close to one. Sure, a commoner's perspective, right?
Yeah,
So, right.
exactly.
So, yeah, what we're going to do today is we're going to present you some evidence based on that book again, and a lot of content we found online. Chintan did a lot of research online, a lot of research, if you can call it that.
What?
And no, no, right. Me too. I mean, we did do a lot of research. That's what I was trying to say. And if yeah, it should be interesting. Good bunch of experiments. So starting with which, I'll show you one where is that? Are you open? There you go. This is an interesting experiment. So uh, evolution uses a process of something called natural selection, which Chintan will explain in a little more depth. I won't get into that, but it'll give you an idea of what evolution is. So this is an example of a crab. Now, this evolution theory is meant to describe everything we have, the variety of species we have, from birds to crocodiles to dinosaurs to human beings to monkeys, right? In this particular example, they're trying to explain the formation of this crab and how its face resembles this ancient Japanese samurai. And right, it's pretty cool, right? The thing is, it doesn't occur naturally, right? How do you get something like this naturally, right? And it resembles the picture so well. Scroll down. I wonder if in this article if they have the image of the samurai. That would be actually perfect. Scroll in. No. Not what we're looking for. Maybe it's not. Maybe we can find the images. But if a simple Google search should find it. So what happened is actually there was an ancient war in Japan where a lot of samurais were killed and dumped in the sea, I believe. And it's believed that a lot of their spirits are still vengeful and live in the sea. And
Whoa.
they got into these crabs. As a result, the fishermen of that time, they would be careful about selecting the right crabs. And if they found a crab which had anything resembling the face of a samurai, they would ditch it.
Right.
And what would happen is they would eat the ones that didn't have a samurai, and they'll leave the ones that did have samurais on face and samurai resembling crab faces.
Right.
And what happened eventually is what was remaining is just the crabs with the samurai face. And over time, it evolved into a more detailed image.
Right. Right.
And yeah, so that's an example of what artificial selection can do. Chintan, what is artificial selection?
That is actually super cool. Like I was wondering where when the actual explanation was gonna come after your spirit's explanation, but yeah, I mean that was really cool. But
Right, right.
artificial selection, I guess, is pretty much. I mean, it as the example that you just gave suggests, it's selecting it. It's mainly selection through humans, as in like it's not. It's
Right.
not like it's not exactly through nature or whatever. So, for
Yeah.
example, all kinds of dogs that we breed are artificially selected, I guess. They and in this the main the explanation that they give is it provides a model that helps us understand natural selection. So it is pretty much selection, but we do it ourselves. I mean, a bigger example I think is a super cool example is this one, I guess,
Yeah.
where we grow this plant called brassica or oleracea or whatever,
Right.
and through
What
this
is
you
the
get.
commoner's name of it, Jin? What's the commoner's name of it? I think Brussels sprouts. No, what is it called?
No, that's
Oh,
what
we
like
don't know.
you,
Oh,
you
okay.
can you
The
it can
original.
be any of these.
Right,
I don't know.
right.
Like I don't know if there is a commoner's name because there are six.
No, no,
You
there
can
probably
call it.
isn't. There probably isn't.
You
Right,
can call it
right.
all these six different things. Like just from
Right.
one plant of this, you can get Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower.
Oh, there's the
Uh,
common. It's a wild mustard plant. Jin.
oh, okay,
That's the brassica. Right.
right.
Right. Same thing.
I
Right.
see. I see what you mean.
Right. Right. So I mean, generally, as a rule of thumb, anything that has a biological name has a common name
Yeah,
because they can't get people to know that.
yeah. So
So wait. I have a story about this.
okay,
Wait, like I told my, it's not basically a story. I told my 10th standard nephew, right?
right.
Yeah, he's technically a younger brother, but he's a nephew. I mean, technically. So I was showing him. I showed him this image I had in that book, and I was showing him how to wear it, and he was amazed. So I would imagine most people when they hear it for the first time, it's crazy when they realize that a broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale are all the same
Yeah,
fucking
my
plants.
mind was
Which
blown.
is
Like I just found out
right.
very pretty recently, and it was in r
Yeah.
slash cool guides, which is a
Okay.
super cool subreddit.
Right.
But yeah, I was mind like my mind was blown. I had no idea.
Right.
So
Right. So you're saying that over time, like what they found and they
yeah,
selected the
why
traits they
it's
want.
artificial is, I guess, you choose how you grow this plant yourself. Like humans, I guess, choose how you grow, and because of how you choose to grow this plant, you get whatever vegetable
Right.
or leaves or whichever whatever you want through it. So if you want
Right.
broccoli, I guess you grow it in such a way that these are more, you
Right.
know.
I think that and like it's a selection thing. So probably one thing I should have mentioned. What happens is this random mutation, right? So some of the wild mustard plants, let's say, they had a broccoli-like growth, okay, because of some random mutation, right? Right? Some random growth,
Right,
some random gene that developed, and then they take only those plants would have that random growth, and they keep reproducing them,
right.
and then it becomes the broccoli traits become more pronounced over generations,
Right,
and
but
then there'll be another version of wild mustard that grew a cabbage leaf or something, and they grew that separately,
that's
you
what
know.
that I think you could call it to be natural selection as well, right? Because
uh,
you at that time are eat are like picking it up to eat whatever
right.
vegetable it is. You're not particularly growing it that way. So I guess it could be argued that that could be natural selection as well, right?
I think what it is we are selecting the traits here. So for growth we are selecting the traits of the cabbage. So the selection we're doing here is the trait of the broccoli.
Right,
So a broccoli, whatever you call it, the tree of broccoli, the
right,
broccoli tree, the tree-like shape. I mean,
right.
in cabbage, you're selecting the traits of the leaf, and then you're regrowing. I mean, I guess the process of growth is a little bit natural, you could say, but it's the traits that are being selected. You see what I'm saying? When you
Uh,
refer to natural and artificial selection, I think they're referring to the traits, no?
Yeah, but this okay, like I
Go
have
on.
this
Go on.
thing
Yeah.
where what all determines natural selection, like for
Right.
example,
Right.
variation, hereditary, and differential reproduction and time. So I guess like if
Very
you,
okay. All those details, huh? Oh, I wish I knew what all those words meant. But
I mean, if you
sure.
go to variation, it says differences in genes, traits, and behaviors among members of population, reproduction, and okay, and
Right.
then there
Right. Right.
is
So variation is the mutation I was talking about.
right, and then
Okay.
there is
Uh,
hereditary. Hereditary is through parents, I guess.
correct. Correct. So I think hereditary will happen in both cases.
Yeah,
Hereditary is there natural and artificial selection.
yeah. And then
Okay,
there is
that we can't
differential
avoid.
reproduction, a situation in
Sorry?
which some
Yeah.
individuals leave more offspring in the next. Okay, this is number of this thing. This one,
Right.
I guess, will the differential reproduction is the number of offsprings that you get through the parent or whatever.
Okay.
So this
Okay.
also could apply, I guess. I don't know.
It could. It could. From my understanding, still the key thing, but we'll find out, I guess, over the experiment. The key thing is the mutation, the variation you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
How that variation occurs is what is natural and unnatural. So if like you said, human involvement, you said, right?
Yeah.
Now in this case, like in our crabs and this animal, this plants thing, are we are selecting what traits need to be reproduced.
But
In
isn't it the
yeah,
same when let's say there is like some insects are eaten and there is
yeah,
color of those
correct,
insects, right?
correct.
And
But there's a key thing: a human didn't do it, an insect did it, and we that's why we consider it natural.
right, okay. I guess so.
Like you
Whatever
said,
humans did, you just consider it as artificial, is it?
which is
That's what
what
I
you
don't
said.
see.
Yes, that's what you said, and that's correct.
Okay.
Right. Go on, go on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's. I just
Right.
thought this was a
Yeah,
super
it's
cool
awesome.
example
Mine,
of artificial
it's
selection.
a
So
classic example and a useful
yeah,
example.
classic example of artificial selection, for sure.
Right.
Like I think I haven't looked too much into it, but I think the dogs, like breeding of what dogs like humans domesticated dogs and the way they look and everything is also a very good example of artificial selection as well.
It is again a classic one. You're right. You're right.
Yeah,
All the way. That's why, like, and that's the problem when artificial selection. We can't account for many things, and that's why a lot of these dogs are unhealthy. I don't know if you know that. Like the pugs and all are
yeah,
a classic case. They all complain about how artificial selection has been a crime
yeah,
of sorts. But that's probably a political discussion. But nonetheless, it happened. So
yeah.
yeah. Right. Cool. That's awesome. So
Yeah, I think
what's next then?
you have another example of is this artificial again or
It's natural, and I'll tell you why. Again, so there's an element of human involvement,
okay?
but the specific mutations have no human involvement,
So is
and
this
that's
an
why.
experiment or what? Is this what is it like?
Yes, yes. In fact, everything we do today is a form of experiment. Well, actually, cabbage and Japanese things weren't experiments. They just happen to be. They weren't for scientific purposes.
Yeah,
Everything else I think I talk about today has to do with experiments.
right.
And it's again cool. I don't know if Darwin conducted this. It is very well possible that Darwin himself conducted it, or it's a very old experiment. I don't know if they mention a year. Genetic genetic testing on pod lizard confirmed that the modern population. Okay, I'm not sure. We're not sure. I'm not sure when this was conducted. I maybe I should have looked that up. But I do know what the experiment, the details of the experiment, and
No,
it's
I think it says
interesting.
1971. So scientists translated
Scientists
for you.
there you go. There you go. So I wonder if Darwin was part of that team, or maybe it was another team. 71. No, that's recent. Darwin was in the
Yeah, I
1800s.
think he was much earlier.
Yeah, much earlier. Cool. Yeah, yeah. So nonetheless, in fact, you know what? I think it was released at the same time Theory of Relativity was released. Like that's 1905 or something. His paper.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but if it is, it's a crazy coincidence.
What? Which one?
Okay.
This one? This experiment?
No. Theory of Evolution is
Oh,
on the
okay. Okay.
origin of species and theory of relativity. Theory of
Okay.
relativity by Einstein. Same day or same year. I'm not sure. So what this one is, what they do is they go to Croatia. They pick there's this species of lizards they're calling, what is it? Let's call it, okay. The island is Podkapiste. Let's just call it scroll up. I think they call, okay, Croatian lizard, Italian wild lizards. Huh? Right. Let's call them Italian wild lizards, right?
Okay.
And they have this island called Podkapiste,
Okay.
and it's indigenous to that island. The lizards are not found anywhere else,
Right.
wherever it's never been reported, and that's how they determine that it's indigenous only to that island. So they go ahead, they pick up, what do they say, 5 pairs, around some pairs, some 5 adult pairs, and they transport it to a neighboring island called Pod Makaru.
Okay.
Again, part of the Croatian islands, or I'm not exactly sure, but I am sure that it's close to Port Kapiste. And they place these 5 adults there.
Okay.
What they look for now, what they want to, what they expect out of this experiment is, if evolution is true over time, there'll be traits and differences, significant different traits between the two species, even though the origin is the same. I mean, they have the same ancestor, and they'll have different traits because their environments are slightly different. The environment of Pod Copice is different from Pod Macro. And what they find out eventually is after I think decades, maybe 4 or 5 decades, if I'm not wrong, 1970s, and I think in the 2000s is when they go make the first visit, or maybe even 2010 or something. Not entirely sure.
It's
2006, maybe.
yeah,
30 years.
30 years.
Oh, experiment was one. And when was this article written? This article we're reading? 2008. So there you go, 2008. So you see that, 2008?
Yeah.
Almost 40 years it's been now, right? I think the experiment's still going on. Obviously, it's still going on because
Oh,
they
it
don't get
is.
all the results.
Okay.
So what happens is they've noticed that on the Pod Piste Island,
Okay.
the shape and sizes, the heads of those original lizards are much smaller than the ones of the Pod Markaro.
Oh.
And right, and I hear you asking why, Arun Chintan. I see that question. I can hear it. It's popping up in my mind. And the reason being is in that island they have more number of plants and less
Okay.
wildlife. So it's difficult. It's a lot more difficult to chew plants, to chew flesh and other kinds of insects and other kind of meat, proteins. You just need to tear it.
Right.
Thing is, for plants, more jaw strength because you need to chew it, right? So they noticed their heads were much larger.
Okay.
And I think it was invariably like 70%, 80% of the population in the Pod Macro had larger heads,
Right.
and in comparison to the ones in Pod Capiste, and they attributed it to the large. Again, well, it's filled with forests, and they had to change their diets and all that. And it's surprising because they're not herbivores otherwise. Their primary diet isn't plants,
Right.
but they had to adapt and they had to evolve. You see that? They had to evolve, just like the theory suggests. And eventually they did evolve. And I'm sure there are other traits, but these are the primary traits that change: the size of the head. And you might have an image of these lizards, but I don't know if they don't have a side by side image of the lizards. It's in the video, I think. Which I
Oh, it's in this video, the next one.
Yeah, maybe you can play it. It unfortunately there's no comparison between Pod Capiste and Pod Macro, but I think this is the original lizards. So other traits also change, physical changes as a result of some changes. You never know which genes and which mutations are connected. So those changes happen, and yeah, that'll be covered in another experiment. Yeah, but basically, I think most of the rest of the video another time maybe funny. But that's basically it. Just a glimpse of what the lizard looks like. Yep. Yeah, look at that. That's two. I think that's how they mate. Maybe. Good. Animal pornography on our channel is nice. Lizard pornography, nice. Okay, what's the next one? I think it's the silver fox experiment. But you see, so that's natural selection because the environment wasn't this. I mean, to some extent, there's human involvement in terms of transporting them, but the traits weren't selected by the humans. The humans didn't decide the traits.
Right. I mean, that's what the only confusion part for me was just like how the crabs thing, you wouldn't entirely call it artificial selection, right?
It's not artificial. Did I say artificial?
No, you didn't.
Oh,
But it still
no, I
involves
did. I did.
humans.
It is artificial in the sense because the traits were selected there again. They were selecting the traits of that shape on the back.
Right. I mean, even so what are you saying? Is that is artificial or that's artificial?
I'm saying it's artificial.
Okay.
I'm saying it's artificial. Okay. Here, it's not artificial because they're not telling you the trait. They don't know how it'll evolve.
Right. I see
You
what
get
you
it?
mean.
Yeah. I think that's it. Same thing in cabbages and broccoli. They decided particular traits. They started farming the ones that gave broccoli mutations, and then that pronounced over generations that pronounced the broccoli traits, and then they kept evolving that. And same thing with cabbages and all that. And it was deliberately farming those plants for broccoli or whatever tree-like structures. I mean, tree-shaped plants or whatever you call them, or Brussels sprouts for that matter. So yeah, that's for my understanding, that's the primary difference, and it kind of makes sense. And the silver fox, right? So this is another classic example of artificial selection. And here, what they do, this is a very famous experiment in Russia. Some scientist, his name is some Dmitry something, very famous experiment. A lot of videos, a lot of contents on it online. People can Google it, research it. I'll try to summarize it. Dmitry Belyaev. That's the name. So the guy's dead, and his first assistant is carrying on the experiment now. And this is 70 years later, right? This is 70. I don't know which generation it is. At least the fourth, fifth, maybe more. I don't know. But 70 years this experiment's been going on, and they tried to see if you can artificially select for behavioral characteristics and not just physical appearances.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So they selected those foxes which were comfortable being with humans.
Yeah.
They weren't aggressive, not feisty, nor were they scared. If they were so, they would keep them separately. They would call them like a negative fox or a positive fox. They had some technical terminology I can't remember. And they'd ensure that softer, human-friendly foxes would breed amongst themselves, interbreed.
Right.
And lo and behold, what expected happened. What was expected happened. Over time, over a few generations, they bred a bunch of foxes, generation foxes, all of them hugging and kissing and hanging out with foxes like this. You cannot hold a wild fox with that. It's
Right.
impossible to hold it like that.
Right.
In the image is what you say. They can't. They just don't. Foxes aren't built like that naturally. And but not if you go to their place in Russia. If you go to their fox farm in Russia, you would see that they're all friendly foxes hugging and kidding. They go to eat their house, and they hang out with humans just like dogs. And the hypothesis is that a lot of this gives us insights into how foxes were, wolves were domesticated into domestic dogs as we see them today. And so wolves to dogs, I think that's written in the line somewhere.
Yeah,
So
that guy's mentee is this lady, apparently. Her name is
yeah, Ludmilla True.
Mila Trout. Yeah, she's still like, that's what, as you said, it's still going on. This is just a recent pick, 2015.
Yep.
This
She
is
was
from,
I said, yeah, that's the old pick, right?
yeah,
Of
this is
course, yeah, that's
1960 and this is 2015. Yeah, she was
nine
that,
six
like his mentee, apparently. Like that
meant,
Trout
yeah,
guy. I mean,
correct,
not
correct,
Trout,
correct.
the Dmitry Believ
Ap-
guy.
Apprentice or whatever. Yeah. Scroll up. Is there anything else interesting? So that's the gist of it. That's the main parts of the experiment. And something pretty cool. Like if you don't know about it, I'm sure it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you could change it. So here's another byproduct of this research. Another inference they made was a lot of the colors were also changing. Even though they're only selecting for behavioral traits, it had physical implications.
Who is it?
Yeah.
Is it
So
because of
what happened?
surroundings or what?
No, that's what they're saying. It had to do with the relationship, the chemical relationship between melanin, dopamine, and other hormones.
Oh.
So you know what melanin is, right? We talk about skin color,
Yeah,
right? You have
skin.
more
Yeah.
melanin, I think,
Yeah.
darker you and stuff like that. Dopamine is for your high and rush, and it makes you feel good. It's a feel good drug, right?
Right.
I think.
Yeah, it is.
Right, and adrenaline is the other things. That also
Fight or
calms you
flight.
down, I think, and
Yeah.
some kind of excitement. Sorry.
Fight or flight or whatever.
Right,
Right.
fight or flight. So when these proportions of these hormone secretions change and decrease, they interact with each other. So the melanin is affected by changes in other hormones. You get it, and you see how that could affect the physical appearance.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So what happens is black becomes silver, and silver foxes, right? And I don't think the intention was silver fox. I think they were all black or something, and then some of them were silver. And I think eye color. There are a lot of traits that change. I can't remember the list of physical changes,
Yeah.
but a lot of changes. And yeah, so that's some discovery they made, and it's an ongoing experiment. And it's what's amazing is how these experiments go on for decades, and as we'll see in a few more experiments we talk about. But it's just crazy how I don't know, the discipline required and the coordination required between multiple generations, and
Yeah.
a lot of the scientists who begin this endeavor of these experiments would never live to see the results of the experiments. You see, they
Exactly.
won't see the beauty, and it's a huge commitment, sacrifice of sorts.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
brilliant.
And
Beautiful.
foxes are super cool as well. Like they seem to be like pretty fascinating, and they I mean they come close to dogs and everything, I guess. And domestication of them will be even closer of them.
Yeah,
So yeah, there
yeah.
are some YouTube channels which I sometimes watch, like Save a Fox, where
Oh,
they
really?
just save
Okay.
foxes from,
Right. Might have mentioned it now that you say.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
That's, there are issues. There are like some domestication issues because they're not meant to be domesticated.
right,
So after this result out in Europe, UK, I read some articles where there are problems with people keeping fox in their house and destroying, causing a havoc in the neighborhood and stuff like that. So,
right,
so it's difficult to domesticate them, but these guys achieved it to a large extent, and
right, yeah,
yeah, and they look cool.
they
I
do.
guess the fox Pokemons look cool. The fox Firefox looks cool.
Yeah, they seem
Weapons
to be
look
pretty
cool.
hyper as well. Like they seem to be hyper dogs or something.
Yeah, aggressive, super hyper. Yeah. Uh, Yeah. Well, I think nine tail or seven tail. I forgot. The poker one's also a fox. No? You remember?
Right. Yeah.
You know, they look cool. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess like another experiment of, which is I guess also another very popular experiment, was the guppy fish experiment.
Okay.
Yeah. So here, what they did was, guppy fishes are like pretty available fishes, so they just added them into separate tanks. So what they
Mm-hmm.
noticed was, so separate tanks where in some of them where there were predators, and some of them which didn't have predators, and there
Uh-huh.
was also male and female connection as well. So what they noticed was, the female guppy fishes, mainly uh, they wanted the ones which were colorful and had spots on them, and things like that.
Right.
But on the contrary, they were also the ones which were colorful and had spots and everything, were easily visible for to predators as well.
Predators.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Obviously. Right.
so so as you would expect with evolution, what happened was, when there were predators, there were lesser spotted and colorful guppy fishes.
Right.
And like I'm not entirely sure of this, but I think the whenever there were, I think the this thing was about survival, right? So it didn't matter if it
Right.
was they weren't attractive to females, I guess.
Oh
So
no, they're both. So I think the technical term is sexual selection, and what you said as selection for survival,
right,
I guess.
right,
So I think it was a variation of both. So the sexual selection works for the more extravagant looking guppies, if you wish,
okay,
the colorful ones you were talking about.
okay.
So
But they will also be
right.
like easily like eaten also, right? So
Right. So I'll elaborate a little on this experiment, same thing, because I did also some research on this,
mhm.
and it's mentioned in the book, by the way. So what this guy does is,
Wait, you've been talking about book, but which book you haven't
oh, I
mentioned?
told you. Oh, did I not mention it?
You
Sorry.
haven't mentioned the
It's
book at
called,
all.
yeah, right. So the book is called Richard Dawkins' The Greatest Show on Earth, and clearly the greatest show he's referring to is our YouTube channel, and no, he's referring to evolution itself, the natural selection. And yeah, it is the greatest show on earth once you learn about it. It's a brilliant show if you start realizing. And right, you should. I think I kind of mentioned it, not properly, but yeah, we should leave it in the link probably from
Yeah,
book and
definitely.
stuff.
I mean, Richard Dawkins is kind of our god, I mean, mine at least. So
Yours, you atheist types. We'll get into that another day. But he is a very good educationer, and he's written a lot of books. He's an expert on the subject. No one can doubt that. And he is a very good author, and he is an inspiration to many, like yourself, and a proponent of atheism, which is another side of his life, a big part of his life. His actually most famous book is The Selfish Gene, which I haven't read, which is why we haven't gotten into explaining what genes are and mutation and stuff like that, because that's another book we have to discuss, and that'd probably get you a better understanding of evolution. But I do expect these experiments to explain to you, to a large extent, to you as in the audience, to a large extent, what evolution is and what it does and what its implications are.
right.
So getting back to the guppies, right?
Yeah.
So in this book, what he says is, so this guy called Edler, I think he's the first one to document this experiment, maybe the first one to think of the idea, because a
Endler, right?
subsequent
This guy, right? John Endler,
Endler,
right?
sorry, yeah, that's right. And because subsequently, currently, the contemporary scientists taking over this experiment are recreating this experiment with someone else. I forgot. It's a famous guy, famous experiment, but it's not a continuation of this experiment. But he's doing the same thing with guppies, essentially. So what Entler did is he found these two lakes, naturally occurring lakes, and not two. Was it two? I think it was 2 or 12 or four. I can't remember. Maybe four lakes or something. Okay. And in one of them, he puts weak predators
Okay.
or non-predators.
Right.
Basically, the weak predators. They're as good as not there, non-existent, but sometimes they would pred. And he put so he had three lakes, I think. In one lake, there were no predators, zero predators. In one, weak predators, and the third one was predators, proper predators,
Right.
right? Guppy predators. They're larger fish that would eat guppies. And the reason he put the weak predators one, because that resembles the natural environments a lot more. It closely resembles the natural environments. Uh, and he had the other two. And he just had the other two as control, just to see compare the differences. Now, what happened in the weak predator, like you said, a lot of the another thing is, again, you could say to some extent this was an artificial selection. To some extent,
Right.
there's always some amount of human involvement. Where the spots, you notice the rocks and the spots and big spots in the water,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there would be those rocks also would have a peculiar color to them, either dark gray or bluish or yellow. I'm not sure. Okay, in the lakes he selected.
Okay.
So what would happen is, in the lakes where there were no predators, the primary instincts or the primary determinant of the traits the fishes would have would be sexual selection. So the more extravagant, the more prettier they look, the more likely they would mate, and those traits would be carried on to the next generation.
Right.
Right. So over time, those fishes became all these colorful fishes, whether it was yellow or blue, I can't remember the colors, but really spotted fishes and stuff like that. Because it didn't matter; they weren't at risk of dying. They didn't get killed; they survived, and their genes propagated, their traits propagated over subsequent generations. In the predators pond, the predators could easily find it, like you said, they could easily find this thing, and they ended up eating them. And yeah, over there, the fishes that survived are the ones that would closely resemble the colors of the rocks, because they would have a advantage of camouflage.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, that's basically the gist of it. It's what you said. Just like, I don't know if it was tanks. I think it was natural lakes.
No, I think there
And
was like
is this the Endler experiment? Because maybe the non-Endler experiment was done. It is Endler, when Dr. Endler. Very efficient. Regions with brightly colored male guppies selected produced population during the dissemination personal innovation. No, they don't mention Trinidad. See, guppies of Trinidad.
right.
I think this was somewhere in nature he found these lakes. Maybe the lakes were created, but it was a natural setting.
I was watching some YouTube video. I think there maybe it was some different people who were just testing
Those
it
are
out or
not,
something.
yeah, that's what I said. There are a lot of contemporary scientists that are now conducting these experiments.
Right.
So they're, this guy's, I don't even know if he's dead. I don't know if does the Wikipedia page mention if he's alive or dead? Is it me or is it fully pixelated? Is it pixelated to you?
No, it's not. I think it's the
Okay, then
stream.
the recording. Fine.
Yeah. I think I don't know. It just says born 1947.
So 60, 80. Yeah, let's given he was born at that time, is likely most people died then, right? Let's just say he's dead. No, he's not. 2012 he was elected. He's not dead.
He's
Would
not
have mentioned he's dead. Would have mentioned he's dead if he's dead.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I don't think he is.
He's not dead. He said, I just killed a famous scientist. Anyway, so that's the experiment.
Yeah, this is also a very famous experiment. I think. Like
it is. All of these are famous ones, and all of these mentioned in the book.
Right.
And from I think everything we talked about today, from the crabs to the cabbage to the what do we go? What's the order?
Crabs one, has it been done again, or is it just
No, it's not a experiment with the intention of experimenting, right? It's like the cabbage thing.
Yeah.
Cabbage was an experiment. Farmers humans realized the power of artificial selection before we discovered evolution.
Right. For sure.
We didn't have, yeah. So because it's been done for generations, especially with corn. The variety of corns with banana, the variety of banana, they're all so varied that it's all artificially selected. We knew this before knowing about it scientifically. So, well, what's next then? I think another experiment would be the fox E. coli. Oof. This is another exciting, elaborate experiment. But again, the reason I suspect why he put in the book and why I'm giving it to you today is a lot of these things have different aspects of evolution that they portray. So, in the case of E. coli, now here's the thing: when it comes to humans, it was something called evolutionary time, right, Chintan?
Right.
Where you have it's a long time to see evolutionary change. You require tens of years, right? Even these guppy experiments and these ones were conducted over a span of 40 years. The fox one was 70 years, 40 years, right?
Yep.
And we see some trends. But if you want to see a lot more drastic changes, you would require a lot more time. Because this theory suggests we were all fishes at some point, or something along those lines, and we evolved to this human beings, right?
Life started in waters, so
right. It started in the waters, and we had some bacteria, or virus, some amoeba, microorganism. And eventually that evolved to some kind of fish, and fishes to some lizards, and then we came to land, and the land back to water, dolphins, and dolphins came back, and something along those lines. There's a whole chain of fossils that depicts the evolution of humans. So this happened over a span of billions of years and hundreds of millions of years, right?
Yeah.
And it's difficult to see evolutionary change. We can't see that transition from a lizard to a human, or whatever it is, a dolphin to a human, or a tortoise, or a fish to a human. So the scientist, one scientist, namely, what's his name? Lenski. What's Lenski's first name? I can't remember. Let's call him Dr. Lenski. He thought bacteria have faster rates of
Richard
regeneration,
Lenski.
reproduction, right? Of passing through generations, of lifespan. They die and reproduce quickly and more quick, and yeah, at a larger rate, more number of offsprings at the time. So what they did is they studied 40,000 generations of E. coli. And 40,000 generations as of the book, which was written maybe 10 years ago, 10, 20 years ago. I think currently the number stands at 70,000, 100,000 generations. To 60,000 in this article. So if you compare that to a human, for a human, 40,000 generations would take a million years. So a million years of human data, we got it in 40 years in bacteria. And that was the intention. 40 years or 20 years, I don't know the exact, but in a few decades. Enough for one generation of humans to study it, which was the intention.
Yep.
And what I'll be describing now, a few of the findings. And what are the findings? So how the experiment was set up would, again, we'll be getting a little elaborate, and it might get a little, you'll have to focus. I'll try to make it as small as I can, summarize it as much as I can.
Okay.
Basically, they had 12 different flasks. Each flask had the same bacteria.
Okay.
With me so far?
Yeah.
They could color code the bacteria through some other, let's say, chemical or substance. Okay, they would drop a drop of bacteria in every flask, and a drop of this color coding material that would color the bacteria.
Okay.
It would only change the color of the bacteria. They studied it and they noticed it changes no other trait. It only changes the color of the bacteria. Okay.
Wait, what changes the color?
This other substance they put into the flask.
Fine.
Right. Reason being is they can keep track of the generations of evolution. They can say this came from the red flask and this came from the blue flask.
Okay.
Because what they'd be doing is at some point they'd be mixing the flasks.
Okay.
And seeing one generation interacted, and they can see which generation dies. If the blue ones dies, they could say the blue ones died.
Right.
You get it, and they could determine, because it's impossible to separate them because they're bacteria, the microorganism, they're all mixed. It's difficult to separate them. But through the blue and red indicators, you can figure that out, right? Mm-hmm. I'm summarizing it significantly, and it's a very concise description, a very vague description, and I'm leaving out a lot of details on purpose. But it will give you an idea, a good idea of what the experiment was trying to achieve. And what happened was, right. So what they do is, so every day they give it, every day or at constant intervals, they'll give it a drop of starch.
Okay.
In the bowl. Okay. The purpose of this experiment was to see if the bacteria would develop efficient ways. They would evolve to develop efficient ways of consuming starch.
Okay.
Over generations, the next generation should be able to maybe consume more starch.
Right.
Get it? Or with some number of starch, they should be able to reproduce more. Keep in mind, bacteria are, I think the word is monosexual. I don't know. They don't require another sex to have sex.
Right.
Right? Because they split on their own, right? Self-regeneration or something like that. Whatever that's called.
Cellular something, it's got to do with that as well. Something, I don't know.
Yeah. Self-splitting. Yeah. We require male and female. They don't. There's a word for it. Genesis. Oh, anyways, yeah. You get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Where they have sex with themselves.
Yep.
Okay. So, what happened? Right. So they put a drop of starch, and they see it rapidly grow. Each flask would grow rapidly. And for the next generation, they would take 1% of that bacteria, and they would take it. They'll discard the rest of the bacteria.
Okay.
And they drop that 1% of bacteria back into the flask. And they do this to all 12 of the flasks. Make sense?
Okay.
And again, they would drop. So that's the second generation, correct?
Yeah. I mean,
right.
yeah.
I don't know. Right? Makes sense.
I mean, because they've reproduced. That's what you're saying, right? I mean,
Correct. They can't say reproduce. That's right. That's right. Exactly.
yeah,
And then yeah, so it might not even be the second generation. It could be
yeah,
multiple generations. Right?
yeah.
And
It
then
could
they
be
do
a
the
mix
same
of
thing.
both, but anyways, yeah.
Yeah. And then they put a drop of starch again, and they do the same thing. It will multiply rapidly. But there's a limit to with one drop of starch, it could only multiply to a certain extent. Because eventually they'll stop multiplying once the starch is over.
Okay.
They have no energy. And that's when they pick the one drop and they transfer it to the new generation, new flask generation. They clean the flask and they put the drop again.
Right. Right.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So they kept doing this over 20 years. I don't know what the frequency, at what regularity they were changing the flask or cleaning the flask, but it happened frequently. And according to them, it took 40,000 generations. That's as of 20 now, as of 20 years ago, as of 40 years ago. Right now, it's at 70,000 generations or so. So what? So they did multiple studies. They intermixed them, and the red color, the blue color, and they started studying and a lot of things, a lot of inferences they made, and a lot of discoveries they made. I won't get into all of them, primarily because I don't understand most of them.
Yeah, I think there is this article. It's very elaborate, so I'll just leave the
Right.
link in the description. So.
Sure. Right. Yeah, that's useful. Thanks. For those